Let's now talk about the amazing spread operator. So we can use the spread operator to basically expand an array into all its elements. So basically unpacking all the array elements at 1. So let's say that we have an array. So 7, 8, and 9. And now we want to create a new array based on this array, but with some new elements at the beginning. So how would we do that? Well, with what we already know, we would need to loop over this array, or even worse, do it like manually. For example, like this. Let's call it the bad new array. So if we wanted to add 1 and 2 to the beginning of this array, we would have to write 1, 2, and then each of these elements, right? So that would be R0, R1, and R2. Okay, let's take a look. And now indeed we get a new array with the 3 original elements and then a 1, 2 at the beginning of that array. Okay, and this is actually quite a common operation that we need to do. And so we can now, since ES6, do it in a much better way using the spread operator. So with the spread operator, it's going to work like this. So let's create a new array. So this is the good, let's say, new array. And then again, we use 1, 2, and then we use the spread operator, which is ... to basically expand this array into all of its individual elements. So let's see the result, and then I will explain it a little bit better. So new array, and you see that we get the exact same result here. So what the spread operator does is to basically take all the values out of this R array and then write them individually as if we wrote 7, 8, 9 here manually. All right. So if we wrote it without these 3 dots, then we would have this array, so this R array inside of this one. So just like this. So 1, 2, and then an array of 7, 8, 9. And that's because here we are including this entire array. But with the spread operator, again, it's like taking all the elements out of the array and writing them here manually. And so when we do this, we then get 7, 8, 9 individually here represented in this new array. So what this means is that we can use the spread operator whenever we would otherwise write multiple values separated by commas. And that situation happens whenever we write an array literal like we did up here. So that's the first situation in which it's very useful to expand an array. And the second situation is when we pass arguments into functions. So for example, let's say that we wanted to actually log the individual elements of this new array here. So if we simply logged the array, then it's of course going to look like this. It's just one value, which is the array. It's just one big value. But if we use the spread operator to expand the new array, then see what happens then. So now it logged the individual elements of the array. So this would be the same as writing 1, 2, 7, 8, 9 individually. So once again, whenever we need the elements of an array individually, then we can use the spread operator. And that is useful when we write an array and when we need to pass multiple elements into a function like we did here. All right, so let's see a bit more useful example. So in this example, we will create an array with one more food item in the main menu array. So that main menu is here at restaurant.mainMenu. And so basically we want to create a new menu here. So const new menu. And then let's say that we want the original array plus one new element. So we can do that by simply expanding the array. So that's restaurant.mainMenu, and then we can add other stuff. So let's say gnocchi, I think, at least that's how I think it's spelled or pronounced in Italian. And so let's have a look at our new menu. And indeed, it has the 3 original elements plus the gnocchi. And keep in mind that here we are indeed creating a completely new array. All right, we are of course not manipulating the restaurant.mainMenu array. So we are building a new array from scratch, and you can see that here by these square brackets. So this brackets syntax here is simply the way in which we have always been writing new arrays. And so here, again, we are writing a new array, but simply based on expanding this array and then adding another element to it. Okay. Now, you might have noticed that the spread operator is actually a bit similar to destructuring, because it also helps us get elements out of arrays, right? Now, the big difference is that the spread operator takes all the elements from the array, and it also doesn't create new variables. And as a consequence, we can only use it in places where we would otherwise write values separated by commas. And in case you're taking notes, probably what I just said would be very helpful to have as a note. Next, let's learn about 2 important use cases of the spread operator, which is to create shallow copies of arrays and to merge 2 arrays together. So let's say copy array, and so let's simply create a copy of the main menu. So main menu copy, and so let's write a new array, and into that new array we will put all the elements that are currently in the main menu. So at restaurant.mainMenu, and that's it. So here we just created a shallow copy of this array. So that's a little bit similar to object.assign that we used in the previous section. Okay, but here this syntax is actually a lot easier to use. Now to join 2 arrays together, so join 2 arrays or more, of course, we can use the same technique. And so maybe at this point you can already guess how that would work. And so you can do this actually as a challenge. So pause the video right now and create this variable menu, which will be an array which contains the whole menu. So both the main menu and the starter menu. So take a minute and try it on your own here. All right, so hopefully you managed to do that. And so the secret here, again, is to use the spread operator. So restaurant, and let's start with the starter menu. So that's going to be our first couple of elements in this new array. And then, of course, we can use the spread operator again. And then this time expand the main menu. .main menu. And so now we end up with an array containing all the food items that are both in the starter and the main menu. And again, because here with this spread operator, we took all the elements out of the starter menu and basically wrote them here into this new array, and then the same with the main menu. All right, so I told you that the spread operator works on arrays, but that's not entirely true, because actually the spread operator works on all so-called iterables. Now, what is an iterable? Well, there are different iterables in JavaScript, and we will talk about all of them by the end of the course. But for now, just know that iterables are things like all arrays, strings, maps, or sets, but not objects. So basically, most of the built-in data structures in JavaScript are now iterables, but except objects. So let me actually write that here for you. Iterables are arrays, strings, maps, and sets, but not objects. Now, anyway, since strings are also iterables, that means that we can use the spread operator on a string as well. So let me quickly show that to you. So let's just create a quick string here, Jonas. And then I want to create an array which contains all the individual letters and plus some other elements. So let's call this one letters. And then we create a new array and expand the string here as well. Then here I want an empty string, and then here I want an S. And now let's log it to the console, and then it will make a little bit more sense. All right. And so indeed, here we get this array where each letter of the original string is now an individual element. So just like we expanded, so we unpacked an array, we now did the same thing with a string. Now just keep in mind that we can still only use the spread operator when building an array or when we pass values into a function. So for example, we can also do this. So expand the string here, and so then it is the same thing as writing this. So J, O, and so on and so forth, right? So indeed, here now we get all the individual elements. All right. So for example, what we can do is to use this to build a string using a template literal. So here, this is not going to work. And that's because this is not a place that expects multiple values separated by a comma. So you see unexpected token. All right. So again, multiple values separated by a comma are usually only expected when we pass arguments into a function or when we build a new array. So take note of that, because that is important to understand about the spread operator. Okay, but now enough with building arrays. Let's now actually write our own function that accepts multiple arguments and then use the spread operator to actually pass those arguments. And so that's going to be a very real life example right there. So let's add here another method now. And so let's say that we want a method to order just pasta, okay? And the pasta always needs to have exactly 3 ingredients. So let's say order pasta, and it's going to be a function. And so now here we need 3 ingredients. So let's just call them inc1, inc2, and inc3. And then just log them to the console or some string. Here is your delicious pasta with, so inc1, inc2, and inc3. So up here we have an error. So this should be number 3. And then let's now call this function. So order pasta. Now what I want to do here is to actually get these ingredients from a prompt window. So remember the prompt function that we can use. And so let's create an array called ingredients. Ingredients. And each element here will be defined by a prompt window. So this here now has nothing to do with the spread operator. It's just a way so that we can actually input the data ourselves. So let's say, and here we need to escape this. So let's make pasta. Ingredient 1. And I think I didn't show you this escaping here before. So here, when we simply write this single quote here to write let's, JavaScript thinks that we are finishing this string here. Okay, and so we could use the double quotes out here, or we can escape using the backslash. Okay, now when we save this, I think that Prettier will actually get rid of this here, but it's still important to know that escaping exists. So basically this masks this single quote here, so that it does not finish the string at this point. So let's save it. And so you see that now the prettier extension actually replaced the single quote with the double quote. And so here we see our prompt already, but let's create two more. So let's say ingredient 2 now, and then another one. So again, here we are simply building an array of the 3 ingredients. Okay, and then we can log it to the console. So just to see A, B, and C. And so indeed, we now get this array ingredients with A, B, and C, which are the 3 strings that we just wrote there. And now, how should we actually call the order pasta function? So restaurant.order pasta. And in the old way, we would now write ingredients 0, ingredients 1, and ingredients 2, right? But since we learned about the spread operator in this lecture, we can now do a lot better. And so instead, we do this. Restaurant.order pasta. And now all we need to do is to expand the elements of the ingredient array. And that will then basically write the 3 elements of the array here separated by commas. So this and this should yield the exact same result. And so let's now test it out with some real data. So let's see, mushrooms, asparagus, and cheese. And so indeed we get now twice, here is your delicious pasta with mushrooms, asparagus, and cheese. And what do you think is the better solution? This one or this one? And especially considering that an array could of course be a lot longer than just 3 elements. So indeed, always go with this more modern ES6 syntax here. It's an amazing addition to the language. And now just to finish this lecture here, since ES 2018, the spread operator actually also works on objects, even though objects are not iterables. So let's write that here. And here let's just write a real world example. And so let's now experiment with this. The first example here was to create a new array based on one initial array, right? And so let's now also create a new restaurant object with all the data from the original one plus some additional data. And so this is actually an amazing way of doing this because it's so much easier than with old JavaScript. So let's call this one new restaurant. And then we can simply spread the old restaurant, and this will then basically copy all the properties of the restaurant into this new object. And then we can add anything that we want. Founder, for example, let's say Giuseppe or Giuseppe, I don't really know how to say it. And of course here the order does not matter as always. So this spread here doesn't even have to be the first one. So let's say we also want the founding year, let's say 1998. Okay, and so with this we created a brand new object. Now we need to get rid of these 3 prompts there because otherwise it's gonna drive us crazy. So let's just take this out and simply log here the new restaurant to the console. And so indeed we get our original object basically plus the founder and plus founded in. Great. And finally, since we were able to do shallow copies of arrays using the spread operator, we can do the same with objects. So instead of using object.assign as we did it in the previous lecture. So let's do that. Restaurant copy. And so all we need to do is an empty object, and then in there expand all the elements of the original object. so the restaurant in this case. And so now if we attempt to change something on the copy dot name, let's call it now Ristorante Roma. And if you're Italian, you're not gonna like how that sounds. But anyway, now as we take a look at both of them, so the name of the copy and the original, now you will see that they are different. So the copy has the name of Ristorante Roma, and the old one has Classico Italiano, which means that indeed we did make a copy of the original restaurant, because otherwise, as we learned by the end of the previous section, changing one object would then also change the other one, right? Cool. So another long lecture here, but we're making really great progress. And of course, we will use all this in real projects later down the road. But again, I chose to teach you these concepts in a separate way and not inside a big project, because this allows me to show you a lot more different examples, and it also makes the material more referenceable for you in the future. And so that's going to be helpful when you're trying to find what you're looking for after taking this course.